We're here talking horse racing, the greatest gambling game in the world. I am Nick.
And I'm Emily.
And we're going to go back over the grade one gamble after a couple of days of digesting it and looking through everything. It was an interesting played tournament. I don't think it was played as well as I would have anticipated given who was there. Dave Nichols ended up winning with, I believe he ended up with $33,325.80. And Dave is an extraordinary player, as is Christian, who finished second. I think Christian probably wants to do a couple of things differently than what he did there at the end, but he ends up with second place and a lot of money, and I believe he still got a BCBC seat. So it may have cost him some money, but I think I don't think he's going to be too upset with himself. And having watched his YouTube and his Twitter, I think he's okay. So.
Yeah, and you said a couple things to touch on real quick, just in terms of the way that it was played and the way that we're watching it is really we have this advantage looking from kind of the outside in and not being in the game, though. Follow the stream enough, and there's many games that you are in and you can kind of see the process through. But when we're able to look at it from that outside looking in and looking at what everybody is doing, which is so hard to do when you're playing, right? Just trying to figure out what everybody else is doing, what they've done in the past, and make moves kind of based on that and using that information. And so using that information to look at players and say, based on what certain ones are doing, maybe this is the right type of play in this type of situation, and going from there. Now, we started to pick it up. We did the live stream. It's on the channel if you want to go through and watch and just kind of to scan from that point. And we'll do many more live streams coming up. But we're going to pick up just in terms of race to race and then sort of that game theory at the end and just how it was really played, won, lost, and in between, and give a couple kind of player assessments at that point, ones that maybe didn't finish in the top but are worthy of a mention based on good play. So to start off, I posted kind of the updates as we were going through. So race one was the leaderboard was slow. So we're gonna start in race 2 leaderboard, where Kevin Willett moved to the top with 57.44 of their starting bankroll. So not quite cold double, but 1 by 2 in there, 2 by 1 double to pick up 5,700. And you can see the top 5 are actually pretty tight. So you have about that top 5 that are around 5,000. Now we'll quickly just kind of jump to race 3. This is on my X feed if you want to go back and look through. Carl Broberg, who was part of that group in the top 5, ended up taking the lead in there, and it's a sizable lead at this point, but 9,100 is not the number that's going to win the tournament, but it's still a good move. Moves to 9,120 in there, and then the next 5 or so in that 5,000 close to $6,000 range. So then we go on to race 4, and this is where Jonathan Kinchin makes a move. Now Carl was at he was at a 91, I believe. So just in that last race. So Jonathan takes the lead, 94.62, by making some cold doubles here. Now he does have 2 entries, which is on the second one, but this one hits. One of those connects, the 7-9 combination. He has that for $1,250 to come back, the 94.62. But his other entry, if we just want to kind of look at his other entry was also all in on the 7-8 combination again, which he did play the 7-8 for 12.5. So his main opinion, and this is what we'll see a lot, I think this is part of the winning strategy for Dave Nichols at the end, and just doing it expertly with one entry to divide your opinion for a backup. His main opinion was 7 with 8. So he had that big on one ticket, and then he split it on the other one. And even though it didn't hit, his backup opinion said, well, this combination is also possible, even though I don't like it as much. That kept him in the game and moved him up to 94.62. So we see that a lot with 2 entries. A lot of times it's sacrifice one, but I think this is a clever way to do it, especially when you kind of see the combinations, what they're paying, and always, again, the context of the tournament at the time. So we'll move on to race 5 from here, where things really move, right? We start seeing those 5 figures. Andy Acero moves to 15,000. Had a strong opinion. I think the horse was 8-1. I'm not sure if I there we go. There was a four horse that he ended up kind of keying around in there, and that picking up the double, closing out the double, hitting the try, hitting the exacta, hitting whatever was kind of left on the win, just a little small exacta. So pretty much like clean the clock with that race. I don't think he
Yep.
left. Did he? Did he
I
leave
think
it
that's
money? I
I
think
don't think he
maybe he had a
did.
double. You know, I think maybe he had a double going forward, but we'll see on the
Okay.
next. We'll see on the
Yeah.
next one. But that was really how you'd want to play, especially if you have an 8-1 shot that you feel good about. Now Christian Helmer's, just real quick, sorry to go back there. Christian Helmer's moving up to 11,000. We'll see him later on the leaderboard. Brad Anderson, solid tournament player, also gets into a dangerous spot there. Phil Metzet with 10,559. They're in that. They're all in contention right now. And pretty much there's a lot of people that are in
Yep.
contention. Unless you're at zero, you're pretty much in contention.
Yep.
Okay, so then we move on to race 6, and who do we lose at the moment? I think we lost Jonathan down a couple spots, but
Yep.
Andy is still up there. Christian is at 10,000. Paul Matisse is the big mover in there, 59 spots. Rich Pawlowski moved up, but because he's Keeneland on site, they weren't always showing what those plays were, so we have no idea what Rich played at that point. But he moved up. And then, does the other picture show what Andy played? I want to see if he kind of.
We
No,
just get what Paul played.
What Paul played, right? Because Paul moved up in there, but this is very like textbook Paul Matisse. I feel like whatever. These are the type of plays that he connects and hits with, and they're so accurate. But Paul moves up, and then we'll move to race 7. Now there's no tweet here, but this is we'll pick up on the live stream. And if you want to kick it off, this is where Christian makes a big move.
This is where in race 7, Christian goes all in and pushes all in for his on the 7 to win, who he had for $10,690 and ended up paying $30,145. And that jumps him up into first place, where he kind of holds steady from there. That was his third minimum play. As you can see up here, he needed 5, so he only needed to play 2 more plays, which in my mind, he's already hit the minimum of playing his full bankroll of $2,500. So he needs to make 2 more place bets, because you can't make show bets in this tournament, and he's done. And so he makes 1 show bet or place bet moving forward, in my opinion, and then at the end, he figures out where he is and where he thinks he needs to get to. And we'll see here.
And I'll say just for people, you can kind of tell by the number, but the 7 winning the race was the favorite in there, just a tick shy of 2 to 1, 1.82 to 1.
And that's one of the things that I like to remind myself constantly while I'm playing these tournaments is I love 4 to 1. But you know what else also works is a $10,000 bet on a 1.8 to 1 shot, because it moves you from 10 grand to 30 grand. And you don't think a 9 to 5 is the play to get you to $30,000, but hey, look, you can. And it's a very, very basic, very simple, very easy way of doing it. You just got to be able to put $10,000 in to bet on a horse to win.
Right. And your ability to assess favorites and say, this is a very strong favorite in this race. This is the horse that should be favored. And like maybe in an everyday play, you're like, I wouldn't bet that horse at less than 2 to 1.
Yep.
But when you have the added equity of the tournament, that doesn't matter as much, right? So there's that goes into it as well. So we can move on.
We move to race 9 there, and this is where Jonathan Kinchin comes back. He had dropped not a lot, but he had moved down the leaderboard more on people jumping over him. And so he moved up 11 spots after race 9. And this is where he came back with the exacta. And we'll talk about this race a little bit deeper than other races, because this is the race where the 110 came in with a dead heat. And so Jonathan's 110 exacta and 10-1 exacta basically play like a box. And so he does, get half of his payout, or half of what the probables were. But in the grand scheme, he ends up with getting basically what he was trying to do in the first place. And so he moves up his
Yeah, and
total to
essentially he
15,000.
did play it as a box because he did the same amount on both. It's just one of those rare occasions that you got paid for both combinations.
Yep. And he
So,
definitely had other opinions there also. I mean,
or
his
more, or
strongest
you did
opinion, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, his
$1.
stronger opinion was the 110, but he did think the 1 would win and then also covered some of the other horses. Same with the 10 where he covered a few of those. Um, it looks like he has opinions on those horses. But having listened to Jonathan talk about his tournament play, I think some of that is also what he thinks the probables will end up being and what
Mhm.
he ends up will getting paid. So his opinion may be that he thinks the 5 can run second, and that one seems the most likely based on the amount he played. Whereas with the 2, he has the 2 with both the 1 and the 10, but much smaller, and I would be willing to bet that's because the probables were telling him he's gonna get paid basically the same 12,000 or so he was playing for. So he was basically all in here.
The 10
Um,
ended up being the favorite over the 1 who was the second choice, that down from an 8-1 morning line, and then the 5 was the third choice at 5-2.
Yep. So that all would make sense on the way he's playing it with terms of trying to get to a number. Obviously not the number he thought was going to win because it only put him into third, but it put him in a position to make the move that we then see him do next, which was in race 10, which was the I guess technically the feature, the Lexington, where we had the huge bomb there that comes in. All
All
right.
right, so following up with race 10 or race 9, which was the Jenny Wiley, we had that one the 110 dead heat, and that leads into the Lexington Stakes. And the Lexington Stakes was won by Trendsetter, who ended up paying $66.68, was 32-1. But it was a type of race where it looked like there was a couple horses in there that were kind of the favorites, right? Between the
Yep.
1, Corona del Oro at 3-1, Confessional at about 2-1, and then Izum at 5-2. And so based on a lot of play, we kind of assumed that when Trendsetter won, it was going to take a lot of people out because this race, not only having those few horses that are very logical types, it's also close to the end. So it's a spot where people can make moves where they feel like, okay, I like the 1. I can really punch like a 1-7. I can really punch a 1-10, things like that. And at this point too, this being race 10, and Christian didn't play this race, correct?
He not that anybody saw. He kind of stayed in the same spot.
Okay. So, and it's sort of as expected when you have the lead, even if it is kind of the type of race that you might play. But
He did play. This is where he played his exacta.
that's right. He ended up playing like a small exacta that just sort of looked like it wasn't really a strong opinion, but it might have been a little bit more defensive in
Yep.
case somebody did hit a combination, which I didn't mind it. I feel like that's decent rationale, but at the same time, you don't need to like give up bankroll in a position on a bet that you don't feel strong in. And obviously, by the volume and the volume that Christian is capable of, and he has shown, you could tell it's not an opinion he was strong in. He just wanted to do something that
It
seemed a little
looked
bit
at
more
in real
defensive.
time when we were talking.
Yeah.
Yep,
Um,
it seemed very much like he was trying to stop Andy from getting to him because he had seen that Andy had been playing not necessarily every race, but many of the
mhm.
races, and Andy was very capable of hitting a $300 exacta or a $250 trifecta or some like I guess it would be a $50 trifecta or a $100 exacta or whatever those numbers ended up being. His total bet was those numbers, but he was capable of making up that $8,000 difference, and so he played it for just cold, which is his what felt like a very defensive. Andy's not going to beat me,
Right.
which and unfortunately for Christian ended up costing him in the end. He
Right.
wasn't going to catch what we'll see here in a second with what Dave Nichols ended up with, so it ended up costing him in that way.
This
But it
was
may have
also
costed him a little bit of his like confidence in like playing that last race more aggressively.
Right, and it is worth noting at this point too, in terms of the last race, it is a maiden special weight race,
Yep.
and a lot of times in the maiden special weight races, um, there can be a little bit more chaos. Now, this one seemed like there was a couple horses that just sort of stood out in there, so a
Yep.
little bit different. But it was also the type of race that, because of that, because there always is maybe some element of chaos versus in a stakes race where you have established form, that would be even more reason to make moves. Now, in terms of Jonathan, thought that would be the time that he would make a move there, because not only of that last race, but based on what this leaderboard is, where he is the type of player that is going to bet that 1400 if he thinks that's going to get the win. And at this point in time, the leader and second having 29,000 to push. And so he ended up playing had doubles a lot. Now, he had a double alive going into race 10
Yes.
from his opinion of 110.
Yep.
So what was left, there was that two things, and there's the clip that we took out, but this is where I just sort of saw his play and like how he was gonna end this, is playing doubles here, from race 10 to race 11 based on that bankroll, which is what Nick is showing right here, which did happen. And had he have hit that double from race 9 to race 10, again, you can see the horses that he used, 1 and 10. Those were not horses that won the race. It was the 8. The more logical types are the ones that he used. If he had hit that double, then he'd have that $6,000 to go into the last race. Plus, in perfect theory, he'd have doubles alive as well. So that was his in-game theory, and it made perfect sense. I think it was played very smart, even though it didn't work out. I respect this play a lot. I think it was like based on his position of the leaderboard, knowing those races ahead, knowing he is the type of player to make these type of big moves. This is how Jonathan Kinchen wins tournaments. Just like this. It just didn't work out today, but this is a winning type play.
Yep. And he had these numbers. I mean, I don't believe he was so invested in this. He's like, I have to play this exactly to this number. I think it was very much, this is what it's going to play, what it's going to pay. And when it hits, I need to hit this number. And so he played it for $2,887. That's a weird number for him to just randomly pull out of the sky. The $3,024, $2,801. Like, these are weird numbers that, require him to actually think about, right? Like, you can just hit the number 2,800 and type that in, but he decided to add that one. He decided to add the 3,012. So he definitely had this mapped out to get to a number. We unfortunately don't have the probables, but I'm willing to bet that his number was 40-ish thousand with these. And if not, it would be to jump ahead of where Christian was. And when his double hit from race 9 to race 10, as Emily said, would have that $6,000 that he could then go into race 11 and pick up more money there if need be.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, if we're just looking at the 1-6 double, so the 6 ended up winning the last race. It was just a tick shy of 2-1, but looked like it was going to be the favorite. And then the 1 was 3-1. So you're going like a 3-1 to a 2-1 at around 2,900.
Yep.
That would be kind of on average, what, 8-1?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so you just do that times 2887, and that's probably what he thought would win the tournament.
Yep. And same thing with the 10 in that race 10, who was, I believe, ended up being the favorite, but was, again, paying just a little bit more to that 6. And so the 6 was the favorite in race 11 at the end of his double. The 11 was the first-time starter who ended up being third choice, and the 4 was the second choice. And again, he played the 1-10 in the Lexington, which were the two. The 10 was the favorite. The 1 was either the second or third choice, but like one of the more logical types. And then the 4, 6, 11 in the last kind of give him that coverage. And he had it covered perfectly if there wasn't chaos in the Lexington.
I'm guessing those doubles, based on just kind of like running some numbers, they probably were. They might have been a little bit short. It might have been basically what, and maybe this is where Dave got his number. Well, no, because he wouldn't have been able to see this at this point. But this is like around 35 is kind of what it looks like. Just again, we don't have the exact probables, but just to give an idea is about that.
And he would have had that $6,000 that
And then
he
he would have
would
had
have
that state. There
won
you go. There you go. Yeah. Then he
from
would have had
the
that, and then he could been able to hedge that on the logical types to close out that final maiden special weight race. But we'll cycle back to real time here. This is the finale. We'll just jump
Yep.
ahead. Yeah, if you want to take it from here.
Yep. So this is I wouldn't say classic, but about as classic of a play as you get in tournaments. David Nichols, an excellent tournament player. I always consider him a very, very like Hall of Fame worthy $2 win place mythical type player. And then he goes and wins the grade 1 gamble and probably is better at these. I just I know him because his picture's on horse tourneys all the time. But he had basically covered this double with the 8-1 in race 10, and he had the 2 and the 8, which were the 2 of the 3 longest shots into the favorite, and he played that for
no, sorry, go ahead, you might get to this.
He played it for $500, so $250 each, which basically got him to the number he was going for. He had a couple other doubles where the more logical one, who we just talked about with Jonathan, the 1 of the 6 that he had for $3,000. So he actually would have beat Jonathan had the one won that race, and then the 6 comes in. But Jonathan had the extra $6,000. So picking.
I think what's good about this play from Dave, and we'll see kind of in contrast to Christian, is that Dave gave himself multiple options to get there, right? You can maybe guess his main opinion was a 1-6 double.
Yep.
But there was a scenario where in race 10 in the Lexington, the 2 and the 8, there was a couple other long shots, but those were the 2 that were coming out of stakes races that probably of the long shots were less stabby, let's say. So using those horses and saying, I have that money, this is going to come back that number. So playing a $250 double to my main opinion, obviously it looks like, which is always nice too, when you have a strong opinion in the finale, my strong opinion to the 6. So even if the 1 most likely to get it done, but if not, if there is that little bit of chaos, I have another plan, right? I'm not drawing dead at that point. Yep. And I think that's something in terms of being a good tournament player that you're thinking about and having those options when they're available. And you see that with Jonathan too, right?
Yep.
Like these different combinations still keep me in the game. He did it from his very first play to make the move into that very last play. That's very quality play.
Yep. And so he did end up, Dave had 16-15 left in his bank roll into that last race, and he knew he had the live double with the 8 winning. So he had the 6. He knew then what his winnings would be if the 6 wins. Because he needs a 6 in this double, it kind of forces him to play these exactas this way. If this double was paying 33,000, I would be willing to bet he plays this exacta the opposite, maybe not the opposite way, but in a way that pays him 30 some odd thousand, basically beating the 6. And whether that's possible or not, probably not in that race with the 6 being the favorite. But this gives him that extra bump that he needs, because he knows that 28,000 isn't catching Christian, though it ends up being enough. At the time, he doesn't think he's catching Christian with his 28,000. So he does have to come back and hit one more thing. Whether or not it should have just been the win bet, I hindsight being, you don't need the win bet, that the win bet would be enough. I think in real time, he was thinking that 33,000 that this would have got him probably wasn't enough.
Right. And I think what you said there was really good. And so I hope people caught it in the sense that the way that he played is, again, it's fluid based on the situation, and it could have been tweaked to where if that payout was coming back to a number that he thought was going to win the tournament, then he could use that 1,600. I'm just reiterating what you said.
Yep.
He would use that 1,600 in a different way to kind of hedge that 32,000. He wouldn't need to double up on it. But because the number might have been a little bit short, he needed to say, I need to back up with a strong opinion here and add to that 2,800 to the best of my ability and hope that it's enough. When you and I were live, we would probably say at that point it was probably going to be around 35, maybe 40.
Mhm.
So there was some like door being open at that point and saying maybe it's not good enough, but I have to I have to just kind of go with this because it does give me a good position. Now getting some feedback, I talked to Dave afterwards, and he had thought about that. He said maybe it would be, I wouldn't be too surprised if somebody did catch me, but because of this tournament of the players, again, this kind of goes back to that knowing who the players are, knowing there's those seats that are involved. He did take that into consideration. Say maybe people won't be as aggressive as they would in, like, let's say a BCBC type scenario with a big
Mhm.
prize money. Maybe they won't be as aggressive, so this might be enough. And so there was that added game theory towards the end there.
Yep, and I mean, with Christian in first at that time, in real time, I was saying 40,000 made the most sense because if that 8 was live to someone, and it was, as you see from these couple of
Mhm.
other players, William McMillan and Gwen Strander, both hitting there at some point, you knew that somebody had, could have thrown that out there. And a $250 double that Dave Nichols had got him to 28,000. So you knew that 28,000 was a number you can get to, right? I mean, we didn't
Mhm.
look at the probables and the will pays and calculate it out to $250 being the number, but just that play alone was enough. Christian doesn't know that, but he probably was doing the how much do they need to catch me? And when he got to that number, he was at 20, he played 1,500 in this race in exactas. Basically, it seems like preferring the 11 based on what the horses are. The 11-6 is paying more than the 6-11. But he basically has it not enough that even if these hit, I don't know if he's got enough to catch Dave with what Dave did with his 6-4 exacta. So even if Christian played this 6-4 instead of 6-11, I don't know if he gets paid enough. And I'll post the actual payouts here and show you what the math would have been.
He exactly
Um,
came back $5.29,
which I
six
think we
four.
also did in
Yeah,
real time. And so
yeah.
he'd be right there. And so it would have been a close call on who wins, even if Christian had played this with the different horse. And given where he was and who was chasing him, at that point it was Andy, who we had talked about during the live stream. He had lots of plays this way where he had coverage and not quite enough oomph behind his coverage
Right,
to get him there, right? Like in
right.
this trifecta here, he ends up playing it for $240, whatever the
But
actual
yeah,
is, but it pays 146. So he actually
right. So he
loses money.
loses.
Same thing with
Yeah,
the trifecta and same thing
yeah,
with this
loses over
trifecta where he just
200.
doesn't
Yeah,
make money with it. So if
and ends up losing money, losing about $600
yep,
when it's all said and done.
and costing himself a spot behind Quinn Strander, who did hit
Yeah,
the double. Um, Basically went very wide with Quinn Sanders, went very wide with his double to the 6, but he had the opinion of the 6, and so he basically played it for $100. And he came back and did it again where he had an opinion on the 7, 8, 11, and then went a little wider in race 11, and he hit both of them. And when you do those, it got him the 15 grand there. He didn't play anything else because he wasn't out of money. He had about 6 grand left, and so
yeah.
if Quinn Strander actually preferred this 6, he could have used that 6 grand he had left, and he would have won this tournament by just being all in on the 6 to win. Had he just pushed that 6 grand there, that's a
Interesting.
hard bet to make. I don't know that I'm making that bet. In all honesty, if I know that I'm alive to the 6 for 15 grand and seeing the leaderboard where it was, like he figures he's going to be in that like
If he's
fourth,
and
fifth
yeah, and
place,
playing
and
and playing for a seat, saying
yep,
it's good enough, and I just want to hold my position, which is kind of what I thought Christian would have done a couple races earlier when he had that 30, and at that point had made four minimum bets, so he wasn't in a position where he had to bet that extra race. He just had to kind of wait and say, if these guys move, then I know, I kind of know what I need to get. Or if I'm in the lead, at least I have so much more of my bankroll that now I can start covering with. And one of the things that, like, you and I had talked about is probably, and based on the way that he playing a double in from race 10 to race 11 maybe would have been like, somewhat, because at least it hides your money, right? You can't see that you played, and it backs up. It kind of does what it sort of does what it's essentially he was trying to do as far as covering, right?
Yep.
But just doing it in a different way without taking so much away from your bankroll and then making a move in the last if needed.
Yep. So I mean, he could have done a similar. Like, he didn't need to be all in. Like Jonathan Kinchin needed to be all in to win the tournament based on his opinions. Where the will pays and the probables of the double probably not going to get him there unless he's all in the way that he was. He could have been not all in on the one in race 10, right? If he just played the 10 into the six, he could have just played it for what he did and not be all in with the 10. But he preferred playing all in there and having the coverage because he had a equal opinion, let's say, of the one and the 10. If he was like, nope, I know who's going to win this race, it's the one, then he could leave himself that money. But
Mm-hmm.
he was, as you said before, like I think Jonathan played that perfectly. He was completely like he had a race 9 to race 10. He was alive because he had the dead heat. And then he knew that he had the 110 coming into that double, which would have moved him way up the leaderboard again, but to second or third. And then he also would have had that double live, which, I would have guessed, you would have guessed, everyone would have guessed, but we also wouldn't have known what he was playing for, right? And then you
Right.
have that guess of what number does Jonathan need to make this to win? And only Jonathan knows the answer to that. And having that double being alive in that way where nobody else knows that it's coming, they know it's coming, but they don't know what you're playing it for. Christian played the exact in race 10 and then again in race 11. And I just think the double, I'm not a huge double fan in these because I think everybody plays the double. I've defaulted back to thinking the exact is the play, and Christian did it. I just don't think he did it for enough, and I think that's whether or
Yeah.
not it cost him. I don't think it did because he was only at 30,000, so he still had to have the correct opinion, and that's the part of this that becomes so difficult. Of like he played what he thought was going to win for the amount he thought he needed, and we were all guessing at that point, and so I think his guess was incorrect, but even still he played it to get to the number he thought he needed. And had he been right, he would have been right. And he would, because the number didn't get to 40 like I thought it was going to. It only got to 33. So all he needed was 35, which is what it looked like he was playing to get to.
Right. And then the contrast of styles where Dave gave himself into race 10 to race 11, he gave himself that backup option.
Yep.
And Christian never really kind of gave himself that backup option. And that could very well be his style to do so. I think it gets, again, and that's based on opinion. It's easy for me and you because we're
Yep.
just like objectively looking at this from that outside. But race 11, the 11 who ran third, and he
Yep.
was together with the 4. So there is a world where that combination does come out. But the 11 is a first time starter, and with first time starters, you never know,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
you never know. Like they could be the real deal, or they could be something silly. And so in a tournament where you really need to be right, I think that is maybe one thing you would consider. Just like, what if this first time starter does something weird?
Yep.
What if this first time starters?
Yep.
Like what's that? Who's this backup type thing?
Yeah.
And it did kind of seem like everybody else was a little bit below in there. So yeah, it's a good tournament. I'm glad, in terms of the results, great play by Dave in there. But we also wanted to mention Chris Couples, who we also thought played really good, had kind of some tough racing luck, went a little bit on tilt over the dead heat, and that altered his play for this finale. Because he reached out and told me he was gonna play the exacta here, but ended up just kind of firing on the 6, which is one of his 2 strong opinions. His other opinion was part of that dead heat was the 1. He was going to go all in there and then play this here, but at least in this way, went for it in race 6 with a horse that he had a strong opinion on. If you want to talk further about this play.
And yeah, that's Chris Couples won the Pegasus World Cup by going all in on Skippy Longstocking. So he is, let's call him a crazy man. But he had the opinion
in a good way.
In the best possible way that I wish I had that gumption like he does. But I mean, he, even in real time, he jumped 26 spots, and I talked about it at the end, like he made a huge play. And if you didn't tell me he didn't like, if he preferred the 4 or he wanted to play the exacta, like I get it. I think he played this about as well as you could. I mean, yes, I guess you throw the exacta because you're trying to win, but at the same time, knowing that he was then mad because he got the dead heat and kind of cost him half of his money. I'll put up the win photo here, showing that he's not very happy about the win photo nor the dead heat, and he made $16,000 on a $2,500 bankroll, ends up 11th. So I don't believe he gets a seat. I do believe he got some cash, not a lot of cash in comparison to what, the winner gets, but you love to see an all in push on a win bet. I'm a big fan of the win bet. I find it to be the best way of making an
Mhm.
opinion count. I mean, we talked about this earlier with Christian, who went all in on a win bet at 9 to 5 and turned 10,000 into 30,000. Chris just didn't have 10,000 to put on it, because if he did, certainly looks like he would have put the
Yeah.
10,000 he had. So he was
Yep.
basically all in on it. And so he did it in a way that like got him up there. You kind of wish that one of these 400 was a 6-4 exacta, just to give him that little extra bump he needed to get to that 10th place. But, all in all, it's a pretty good play.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chris played good. We'll hear from Chris many more times
Yes.
and coming on. So great. Anything else you want to add, or that's a wrap?
I think
As far
that's,
as the wrap of the wrap, the
yep.
wrap of the
the recap of the Grade One
yes.
Gamble. I think I going over tournaments in general, I'm a big fan of tournaments. That's why we do these shows. Grade One Gamble is one that I think is the second biggest live money contest in my opinion. I think it's the BCBC and then the Grade One Gamble. It's not one that I dream of playing in because I'm not a Keeneland fan, but it's a big deal and people want to win it. And I think they people proved that by the way they played. So outside of this, what are you? I'm going to make you rank tournaments now, and we may make this not be the end. We may cut this off and make it its own
Okay.
little separate thing. When you think of tournaments, which ones do you think of as the biggest, and which ones do you think like people are like these are the majors? Like I think the BCBC is the obvious one. NHC not a cash contest, so we won't count that one. But what other ones do you
Yeah,
kind of put in that boat?
NHC is like a different monster, but I think the BCBC is like on a pedestal all on its own. I think it's it's very elite. I mean, in terms of what it takes to win, right? There's a lot of people that are in, but regardless of who you talk to, people will say there's a very small percentage of those people that can actually win, because when push literally comes to shove, who's able to do it. So I think that tournament is just kind of standing on its own. Now,
Yep.
Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge, I think is making moves, and we'll cover that in a few weeks. But I think that could be up there in terms of two. Pegasus Betting Challenge is obviously in there. But yeah, I think, and also it's also the benefit of being on those big days, right?
Yep.
Having Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge on Breeders' Cup, where
Yep.
everyone's playing, having Kentucky Derby Betting
Yep.
Challenge on Kentucky Derby Day, where those pools are going to be big, things like that, and then that helps out too in terms of Pegasus and Grade One Gamble. These are big weekends at that time of the calendar as
Yep.
well. So those ones tend to stand out. Is there one I'm missing? Is there one that's
Those are the three that I was thinking, or four I was thinking between the Pegasus, the Grade One Gamble, Kentucky Derby, and then the BCBC. Obviously, I think there's a Saratoga contest that's not
hmm,
as big. The Travers, I'm pretty sure it's
yeah,
kind of moved around. There hasn't been like this like one that you play at that one place or on that one site like you do with these other ones. But yeah, I think those are the three. I think Pegasus, Grade One Gamble, and Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge are like the three like next tier. And then from there you kind of run into a lot of these like similar ones that none of them kind of stand out as being the next big thing. I guess the other one would be the Turf Championship or whatever they're calling it, King of the Turf at
Kentucky
Kentucky
Downs.
Downs, which we
Yeah.
don't acknowledge because Matt Miller and Dr. Tang have both won it. So that doesn't actually exist because they both have
Yeah.
belts. And if you talk to them,
Oh
try to go
God.
5 minutes of talking to either of them without them mentioning that they have a belt. So
Mhm.
if you are running a contest, if you make a silly trophy like a belt, you'll get you get idiots like us who are more excited about that than
Well,
the hundreds
Tony
of
Tony
$1,000
Joe
you
won
win.
the belt at Hawthorne.
Also
I
true.
wasn't a fan of the belt, but He
Yeah,
has it.
he has it, and he walked away with. He also walked away with a big check they had to take
Yeah,
home
that's right.
on the
That's
plane,
right.
which is also one of the coolest things. So, all right, but that's going to be a separate episode that we'll post as like a short or something. So
Okay.
let I just thought of it like as I was
Yeah,
watching it,
yeah,
so I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah. It's a
so
good
we'll
one.
we'll cut there. Now we'll finish the actual grade one gamble. So I made myself a lot more work of having to now edit more.
But
So,
a whole new
um,
video of content.
yeah,
So
there you go.
yeah.
Look at me, a content machine. So yeah, I think we covered. I mean, we covered it live. We covered it as a recap. I think we covered enough of this contest, but I think it deserves the coverage. I think the
Mhm.
play at the end deserves the coverage. I think there's a lot of different parts and different ways of doing it. I mean, you can hit a double to get you a win. You can hit the exacta to get you the win, and that's the beauty of these contests. You have to have the ability to push like this. And in these contests that aren't the BCBC, I don't know if it becomes the risk worth the reward. 60 grand is 60 grand, but it's not 400 grand like you'd get for winning the BCBC. So a $90,000 bet on a 3 to 5 that ends up paying you 9 to 2 value, it's different than playing 6-4 exacta in this race that, gets you a BCBC seat. And, 60 grand I'd take, but also not sure I'm willing to risk 20 grand to get there.
There's definitely that, and again, that came into Dave's end game theory, and I think that having that get end game theory and going through the practice, or even just watching these, you can learn so much from them. We've done like hypotheticals in running, but to have an idea of like what that total is going to be, what are other people going to do, what are they looking for out of this tournament? Those are all things to consider in tournament play, which is just part of why we love it and why we love covering it and why we're going to continue to cover it. I think the next one we're going to do is Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge. We haven't quite figured out the logistics of how we're going to do it, but there will definitely be something on it for sure.
Absolutely. And more to come after that, because as it turns out, with Twin Spires running these contests now, we do spaces for them, but we aren't just going to be covering Twin Spires contests. We like all contests, as it turns out.
Mhm.
So if you put together a good tournament, we'll watch it and we'll talk about it. Whether we're doing
Yeah,
it live or
exactly.
if we're doing it in on Twitter and DMs, we're gonna pay attention about
Right.
how people are playing it. So at some point we'll talk more about all the tournaments that are coming up. But for now, I think we covered it.
We did. All right. Until next time.